The courtroom fell into a silence so absolute that even breathing seemed forbidden when 23-year-old Madison Hartwell walked through those heavy oak doors like she owned not just the room, but the very concept of justice itself. If you believe no one should be above the law, hit that like button right now. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Judge Elias Monroe's courtroom, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches that had witnessed decades of truth and consequence. The air hung heavy with anticipation, thick enough to taste as spectators pressed shoulder to shoulder in the gallery, their whispers dying the moment Madison Hartwell made her entrance. She wore a designer dress that cost more than most people in that room earned in 3 months, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of someone who had never once been told no. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her face carried that particular expression of bored contempt that only comes from a lifetime of unlimited privilege and zero accountability. Madison Hartwell was the granddaughter of Governor Richard Hartwell, a man who had occupied the state's highest office for the past 6 years and who wielded political power like a weapon. And Madison knew it. She had grown up in mansions and country clubs, had attended the most exclusive private schools, had crashed 3 different luxury cars before she was 21, and had walked away from each incident without so much as a traffic ticket. The Hartwell name had always been her shield, her sword, her get-out-of-jail-free card, until today. The charges against Madison were serious enough to make even seasoned prosecutors wince. Vehicular manslaughter while driving under the influence, leaving the scene of an accident, obstruction of justice. 3 months earlier, on a rain-slicked Friday night in downtown Metro City, Madison had been driving her grandfather's personal Mercedes at 70 miles per hour through a residential district, her blood alcohol level nearly triple the legal limit. She had run a red light at the intersection of Maple and 14th Street and slammed into a sedan carrying 38-year-old Daniel Torres, a construction worker and father of 2 young daughters, who had been on his way home from a double shift. The impact had been devastating. Daniel Torres died at the scene, his car crumpled like paper, while Madison had fled, leaving her shattered headlight and her victims behind her. She had made it 3 blocks before crashing into a fire hydrant, and when officers arrived, she had laughed in their faces, pulled out her phone, and called her grandfather before the officers could even read her rights. Within 2 hours, high-powered attorneys had descended on the police station like vultures, and within 24 hours, Madison had been released on bail so low it was insulting. For 3 months, her legal team had filed motion after motion, seeking dismissals, challenging evidence, attacking procedures, doing everything possible to ensure that Madison Hartwell would never face the consequences of taking a man's life. But today was different. Today, Madison stood in the courtroom of Judge Elias Monroe, and Judge Monroe did not care who your grandfather was. Judge Monroe sat at his bench like an ancient oak tree, unmovable and eternal. He was in his early 60s, with steel-gray hair, deep-set eyes that missed nothing, and a face carved by decades of witnessing humanity at its worst, and occasionally its best. He wore his black robes not as costume, but as armor, and when he looked at someone, it felt like he was reading their entire history, their every choice, their very soul. He had been on the bench for 32 years, and in that time he had earned a reputation as fair, incorruptible, and absolutely merciless toward those who believed themselves above the law. Lawyers spoke his name with respect, criminals spoke it with fear, and entitled rich kids like Madison Hartwell were about to learn why. The prosecutor was Elena Martinez, a brilliant attorney in her mid-40s, with a reputation for preparation and passion. She had spent weeks building this case, interviewing witnesses, reviewing evidence, preparing for every possible defense maneuver. Across from her sat Madison's defense team, 3 attorneys in suits that cost more than cars, led by Marcus Whitfield, a silver-haired legal hired gun who specialized in making problems disappear for wealthy clients. Whitfield smiled easily, spoke smoothly, and believed absolutely that money and connections could overcome any inconvenient thing like evidence or justice. Judge Monroe surveyed the courtroom with those penetrating eyes, letting the silence stretch until every person present understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. This court is now in session. We are here to address the case of the state versus Madison Elizabeth Hartwell, charged with vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated, leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death and obstruction of justice. Before we proceed with opening statements, are there any preliminary matters? Madison leaned back in her chair, examining her manicured nails with studied boredom, as if this entire proceeding was nothing more than a tedious inconvenience. Whitfield stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Your Honor, the defense would like to renew our motion to dismiss these charges based on procedural irregularities in the initial arrest and— Denied, Judge Monroe said, the single word falling like a gavel. I have reviewed your motion, Mr. Whitfield. It was without merit when you filed it the first time, and repetition has not improved its quality. Is there anything else? Whitfield's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, given my client's family connections and the high-profile nature of this case, we believe there may be concerns about the ability to ensure a fair trial in this venue. We would like to request— Mr. Whitfield, Judge Monroe interrupted, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze steel. In my courtroom, a defendant's last name is legally and morally irrelevant. Miss Hartwell will receive exactly the same treatment as any other defendant charged with taking a human life while intoxicated. No more, no less. If you interpret equal treatment under law as somehow unfair, that tells me everything I need to know about your expectations. Your motion is denied. Anything else? The courtroom rustled with barely suppressed reactions. Several spectators exchanged glances. Madison looked up from her nails for the first time, a small frown crossing her face, as if she was only now beginning to realize this might not go exactly as she had assumed. Whitfield sat down, his expression neutral, but his jaw tight. Prosecutor Martinez stood, and when she spoke, her voice carried both professionalism and barely contained anger. The state is ready to proceed, Your Honor. Then let's begin, Judge Monroe said. Ms. Martinez, your opening statement. Elena Martinez walked to the center of the courtroom, and when she turned to face the jury, every person in that room could see the weight she carried, the responsibility of speaking for a man who could no longer speak for himself. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about choices and consequences. On the night of September 15th, the defendant, Madison Hartwell, made a series of choices. She chose to attend a party in the downtown district. She chose to consume numerous alcoholic beverages over the course of 3 hours. She chose to ignore friends who offered to call her a car. She chose to get behind the wheel of a 3-ton vehicle while severely intoxicated. She chose to drive at speeds nearly double the limit through residential streets. She chose to run a red light. And when her choices resulted in the death of Daniel Torres, a 38-year-old father of 2, she chose to flee the scene, leaving him dying in his crushed vehicle while she drove away. Martinez paused, letting those words settle into the consciousness of everyone present. Madison shifted in her seat, her expression shifting from bored to annoyed, as if the prosecutor was being unnecessarily dramatic about something trivial. Daniel Torres worked 2 jobs to support his family, Martinez continued, her voice steady and clear. He was driving home from a construction shift at 11:30 at night, obeying all traffic laws, when the defendant's Mercedes struck his vehicle at approximately 70 miles per hour. The impact killed him instantly. Meanwhile, the defendant fled the scene, crashed into a fire hydrant 3 blocks away, and when officers arrived, she was laughing, because she believed, she knew, that her family name would protect her from consequence. For 3 months, her attorneys have tried to prove her right, filing motion after motion to dismiss, delay, and derail justice. But the evidence in this case is overwhelming. We have toxicology reports showing her blood alcohol level at 0.23. We have surveillance footage showing her vehicle running the red light. We have physical evidence linking her car to the scene. We have witnesses who will testify to her intoxication. And most importantly, we have a dead man who will never see his daughters grow up because the defendant believed she was above the law. The gallery was absolutely silent. Several people in the back rows were wiping tears. In the front row sat Daniel Torres's widow, Maria, flanked by her 2 daughters, ages 8 and 6, both wearing their Sunday dresses. Maria's face was carved from grief and determination. Her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. Martinez finished her opening statement and returned to her table. Whitfield rose for the defense, and his entire demeanor screamed expensive confidence. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, The prosecution would have you believe this is a simple case with a clear villain and obvious guilt. But the law is never that simple. Yes, a tragedy occurred. Yes, Mr. Torres lost his life, and that is genuinely unfortunate. But the prosecution has failed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that my client was the driver of the vehicle at the time of the accident. The toxicology report was conducted hours after the incident. The surveillance footage is grainy and inconclusive, and the witnesses the prosecution plans to call are unreliable at best. What we have here is a rush to judgment driven by public outcry and political pressure, an attempt to make an example of a young woman simply because of her family name. We will show that reasonable doubt exists, and we will ask you to remember that in America, even people named Hartwell are entitled to the presumption of innocence. It was a masterful opening, delivered with practiced ease and designed to plant seeds of doubt while subtly playing the victim card. Whitfield sat down, looking satisfied. Madison leaned over and whispered something to him, and he nodded, patting her hand reassuringly. Judge Monroe's expression never changed, but something in his eyes suggested he had seen this performance 1,000 times before and was supremely unimpressed. Ms. Martinez, call your first witness. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically and devastatingly. First came Officer Raymond Chen, one of the responding officers, who testified about arriving at the fire hydrant crash site and finding Madison Hartwell standing beside the wrecked Mercedes, her speech slurred, her balance unsteady, reeking of alcohol. He described how she had pulled out her phone and said, "My grandfather is Governor Hartwell, and you're all going to lose your jobs." He testified about the broken headlight, the front-end damage consistent with a high-speed collision, and the streaks of paint and debris that forensics would later match to Daniel Torres's vehicle. Whitfield cross-examined aggressively, suggesting Officer Chen had personal bias, that his memory was suspect, that he couldn't be certain about the defendant's exact words. But Chen remained calm and professional, referring to his contemporaneous notes, never wavering from his account. Next came the forensic toxicologist, Dr. Patricia Simmons, who walked the jury through the science of blood alcohol testing, explaining that Madison's level of 0.23 meant she was nearly 3 times the legal limit, that at that level, cognitive function, reaction time, and judgment are severely impaired. She testified that even accounting for metabolization rates, Madison would have been significantly intoxicated at the time of the initial collision. Whitfield tried to attack the chain of custody, the calibration of equipment, the timing of the test. Dr. Simmons calmly refuted each suggestion with documentation, certifications, and unshakable professionalism. Then came the surveillance footage. The courtroom darkened, and on a large screen, grainy but clear enough, the jury watched a black Mercedes sedan approach the intersection of Maple and 14th at high speed. The traffic signal was clearly red. The Mercedes didn't slow. And then, impact. The footage showed Daniel Torres's sedan spinning violently from the force, crumpling, while the Mercedes careened away, one headlight dark, moving erratically, but still fleeing. The timestamp read 11:34 p.m. The date read September 15th. The courtroom sat in horrified silence as the video played. Maria Torres sobbed quietly, her daughters clinging to her. Madison stared at the screen, her face carefully blank, but her fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Your Honor," Martinez said quietly, "the state rests for the lunch recess. We have 3 more witnesses this afternoon." Judge Monroe nodded. "We'll recess until 1:30. This court is adjourned." The lunch break did nothing to diminish the tension. If anything, when court resumed, the atmosphere was even heavier, charged with the weight of what everyone had seen on that surveillance footage. The moment a young woman's reckless choices destroyed a family. Martinez called her next witness, Jessica Brennan, who had been at the party with Madison that night. Jessica was clearly uncomfortable, glancing nervously at Madison before taking the stand. She testified that Madison had been drinking heavily, that she had been visibly intoxicated, that several people had tried to convince her not to drive. Jessica described how Madison had laughed off their concerns, said something about how cops in this city knew better than to mess with a Hartwell, and had grabbed the Mercedes keys from the valet. "Did the defendant say anything else before she left?" Martinez asked. Jessica hesitated, then nodded. She said, "Rules are for people who matter," and then she drove off. A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. Judge Monroe's eyes narrowed fractionally. Madison's face flushed red, and she leaned toward Whitfield, whispering urgently. Whitfield's cross-examination tried to suggest Jessica had her own reasons to lie, that she was jealous of Madison, that her memory was impaired. But Jessica held firm, her voice shaking, but clear. Then came the medical examiner, Dr. Robert Hassan, who testified about Daniel Torres's injuries, about the catastrophic trauma caused by a high-speed impact, about how death had been instantaneous. His testimony was clinical but devastating, painting a picture of violence and finality that left the courtroom silent. Finally, Martinez called her last witness. The state calls Maria Torres. Daniel Torres's widow rose from her seat, moving slowly toward the witness stand as if walking through deep water. She wore a simple black dress, and her face carried the kind of grief that never fully heals, the kind that becomes part of your bone structure. She was sworn in, sat down, and looked directly at Madison Hartwell with eyes that held no hatred, only an exhaustion beyond words. Martinez spoke gently. "Mrs. Torres, can you tell the jury about your husband?" Maria's voice was soft but steady. "Daniel was a good man. He worked construction, and when work was slow, he did landscaping, painting, whatever he could find. He worked so hard because he wanted our daughters to have opportunities he never had. He wanted them to go to college, to have choices." Her voice caught. "He was driving home that night from a job in Henderson Valley. He had texted me at 11:20, said he'd be home in 20 minutes, asked if I wanted him to pick up ice cream. That was Daniel, always thinking of us. And what happened when you learned about the accident? The police came to our door at 1 in the morning. I thought I was having a nightmare. They said Daniel was gone, that someone had hit him and left him there, and I couldn't understand how someone could do that, how someone could take a life and just drive away." Martinez let that silence stretch. Then she asked, "What do you want to say to the defendant?" Maria turned toward Madison, and for the first time, Madison looked directly at Daniel Torres's widow. Whatever Madison saw in those eyes made something shift in her expression, some flicker of discomfort. "I don't hate you," Maria said quietly. "I'm too tired to hate, but I need you to understand what you took. You didn't just kill my husband. You destroyed our entire world. My daughters wake up crying for their daddy. Our 8-year-old asked me if she did something wrong, if that's why he's not coming back. Our 6-year-old draws pictures of him and puts them under her pillow. I work 3 jobs now trying to keep our apartment, and every night I come home exhausted, and I still have to be both parents, and I am failing every single day." Her voice cracked. "Daniel was everything to us. He was our world. And you took him away like he was nothing, like his life didn't matter, and then you ran. I just need you to understand that he mattered. He mattered so much." The courtroom was absolutely silent, except for muffled crying from the gallery. Even the court reporter was wiping her eyes. Judge Monroe sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked on Madison Hartwell. Madison's carefully maintained mask finally cracked. Her face flushed, her hands trembled, and for just a moment she looked like what she was, a 23-year-old confronted with the reality of what she had done, the irreversible devastation her choices had caused. But then she did something that changed everything. Madison leaned toward Whitfield and whispered something. Whitfield's eyes widened and he shook his head sharply. Madison whispered again, more insistently. Whitfield put his hand on her arm, clearly trying to stop her, but Madison pulled away and suddenly stood up. "Your Honor," Madison said, her voice loud in the quiet courtroom, carrying that tone of privileged annoyance that suggested this had all gone on quite long enough. "I'd like to say something." Judge Monroe's gaze shifted to her with the precision of a laser. "Miss Hartwell, your attorney has not indicated you plan to testify. If you wish to take the stand, that is your right, but you should consult with counsel first." "I don't need to consult with anyone," Madison said, her voice rising with frustrated anger. "This whole thing is ridiculous. Everyone is acting like I'm some kind of monster, but accidents happen. People die. That's life. I'm sorry her husband is dead, I really am, but sending me to prison isn't going to bring him back. My grandfather knows important people. He knows judges, prosecutors, the attorney general. He's already making calls. He's going to fix this." She looked directly at Judge Monroe, and her next words were delivered with the absolute confidence of someone who had never faced a consequence in her life. "My grandpa decides what happens here today, not you." The courtroom exploded. Gasps and shouts erupted from the gallery. Martinez shot to her feet. Whitfield dropped his head into his hands. Maria Torres stared in disbelief. And Judge Monroe? Judge Monroe went very, very still. He raised one hand, and instantly the courtroom fell silent, everyone responding to that gesture of absolute authority. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its calmness. Miss Hartwell, please repeat what you just said. I want to make certain the court reporter has it exactly correct. Madison, incredibly, didn't recognize the danger she was in. I said my grandfather decides what happens here. Governor Hartwell. He's going to make some calls, and this whole thing is going to go away. So maybe we can just wrap this up? Judge Monroe looked at her for a long moment, and something in his eyes made even Madison finally falter. Some instinct for self-preservation finally kicking in too late to save her. Bailiff, Judge Monroe said quietly, please escort the jury to the deliberation room. As the confused jury filed out, the tension in the courtroom became almost unbearable. When the last juror had left and the door closed, Judge Monroe turned his full attention to Madison Hartwell, and when he spoke, every word carried the weight of 32 years of judicial authority. Miss Hartwell, I have presided over this court for 3 decades. In that time, I have seen murderers and thieves, con artists and violent offenders, people who have committed acts that would haunt your nightmares. But do you know what I have never seen? I have never seen someone stand in this courtroom, in the presence of the family they destroyed, and suggest that their grandfather's political connections place them above the law, above justice, above basic human decency. Madison's face went pale. Whitfield tried to stand. Your Honor, my client is clearly emotional and— Sit down, Mr. Whitfield, Judge Monroe said, not raising his voice, not needing to. Your client is about to learn something that apparently nobody in her privileged life has ever taught her. Miss Hartwell, this is not your grandfather's mansion. This is not some country club where your last name opens doors. This is a court of law. Here, the only thing that matters is truth, evidence, and justice. You came into this courtroom treating this proceeding like an inconvenience, like an obstacle to be removed with phone calls and connections. You sat through testimony about how you killed a man while driving drunk. You watched his widow describe how you destroyed her family, and your response was to suggest that none of it matters because your grandfather knows people. He paused, letting that statement hang in the air like smoke. Let me be absolutely clear about something. I don't care if your grandfather is the governor. I don't care if he's the president. I don't care if he's the pope. In this courtroom, you are not Governor Hartwell's granddaughter. You are the defendant, charged with vehicular manslaughter, and you will be judged by the evidence and the law, nothing more and nothing less. Madison's hands were shaking now. Her voice came out smaller, uncertain. But, my grandfather said. Your grandfather, Judge Monroe said, his voice dropping to something quiet and utterly final, has no power here. None. And if he has been telling you otherwise, then he has done you a profound disservice, because he has allowed you to believe that actions don't have consequences, that human lives are negotiable, that justice is something that can be bought or influenced or avoided. That belief has led you to this moment. That belief is why you killed Daniel Torres and felt no remorse. That belief is why you fled the scene. That belief is why you have shown nothing but contempt for these proceedings. And that belief ends today. The courtroom was so silent that the sound of Madison's ragged breathing was audible. Judge Monroe continued, his words precise and devastating. You stood before this court and admitted, in your own words, that you expect your family connections to override the justice system. You demonstrated exactly the kind of arrogance and disregard for human life that led to Daniel Torres's death. You have shown this court and this community exactly who you are. And I want you to understand something, Miss Hartwell. When this trial concludes and you are convicted, because you will be convicted based on the overwhelming evidence against you, you will go to prison, not because of politics, not because of pressure, but because you took a life through your reckless, intoxicated, arrogant choices, and because in a nation of laws, that means consequences. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried not anger but something worse, disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than fury. Your grandfather may be governor, but he raised a granddaughter who believes human lives are worth less than her convenience. That's not a political failure. That's a moral one. And it ends here, in this courtroom, where every person is equal before the law. Madison was crying now, her carefully constructed confidence shattered completely. Whitfield looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't find any grounds that wouldn't make things worse. Judge Monroe's voice softened slightly, but lost none of its authority. Miss Hartwell, you have a decision to make. You can sit down, consult with your attorney, and allow this trial to proceed with the dignity it deserves. Or you can continue to demonstrate the contempt for this process that you've shown today. But understand that your words here will be part of the record. They will be considered when sentencing comes. Choose wisely. Madison sat down, her face in her hands, her entire body shaking. The fight had gone out of her completely, replaced by what might have been the first genuine understanding of consequence she'd ever experienced. Judge Monroe turned to the bailiff. "Bring the jury back." The trial continued, but something fundamental had shifted. The defense presented its case, but it was half-hearted at best, Whitfield going through motions he knew were futile. Madison never took the stand. The surveillance footage, the toxicology report, the eyewitness testimony, all of it built an insurmountable case. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty of vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated. Guilty of leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death. Guilty of obstruction of justice. Madison wept as the verdicts were read. In the gallery, Maria Torres sat with her arms around her daughters, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of joy, but of exhausted relief that justice had finally been done. 2 weeks later, the courtroom filled again for sentencing. Madison looked different now, smaller somehow, the arrogance burned away by the reality of conviction and the looming consequence of incarceration. Maria Torres sat in the same spot, her daughters beside her, ready to deliver her victim impact statement. When Judge Monroe entered and took his seat, the gravity of the moment settled over everyone present. He reviewed the pre-sentence report, listened to Maria Torres describe the ongoing devastation to her family, heard the defense's plea for leniency, and then he looked at Madison Hartwell with those penetrating eyes. "Miss Hartwell, stand please." Madison stood on shaking legs, Whitfield beside her. "I have presided over many sentencings in my career," Judge Monroe began. "Each one requires balancing justice, deterrence, rehabilitation, and public safety. In your case, those factors align with unusual clarity. You took a life through choices that were entirely preventable. You fled the scene, showing callous disregard for your victim. You obstructed justice through your family's attempts to interfere. And most tellingly, you demonstrated in this very courtroom that you believed yourself above the law, that your family name exempted you from consequence." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "The maximum sentence for vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated is 15 years. For leaving the scene resulting in death, 10 years. For obstruction, 5 years. The prosecution has recommended these sentences run consecutively. Your attorney has argued for concurrent sentencing and early parole eligibility. I have carefully considered both positions." The courtroom held its collective breath. "On the count of vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison. On the count of leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death, I sentence you to 10 years to run consecutively. On the count of obstruction of justice, I sentence you to 5 years, also consecutive. That is a total of 30 years. You will be eligible for parole after serving 85% of your sentence, approximately 25 and a half years. By the time you are released, you will be nearly 50 years old, and perhaps you will finally understand that actions have consequences, that human lives have value, and that nobody, not even the granddaughter of a governor, is above the law." Madison collapsed, her wail of anguish echoing through the courtroom. Whitfield grabbed her, trying to keep her on her feet. In the gallery, some people gasped at the harshness of the sentence, but many more nodded in grim satisfaction. Judge Monroe wasn't finished. "Miss Hartwell, I want you to understand something. The man you killed, Daniel Torres, will never see his daughters graduate from high school. He will never walk them down the aisle. He will never meet his grandchildren. His wife will spend decades grieving his loss, working multiple jobs to provide for their children, carrying an emptiness that will never be filled. You took all of that from them through choices that were entirely yours. Your 25 years in prison is a fraction of the life sentence you gave Maria Torres and her daughters. It is less than you deserve, but it is what the law allows. I hope you use that time to become someone your victim's family could one day forgive, though they are under no obligation to ever offer that forgiveness. He looked to the bailiffs. Remand the defendant into custody immediately. As Madison was led away in handcuffs, still crying, Maria Torres stood and said quietly, "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for seeing my husband as a person who mattered." Judge Monroe nodded to her with deep respect. "He did matter, Mrs. Torres, and justice, though late, has finally been served." The courtroom emptied slowly, people talking in hushed voices about the severity of the sentence, about Madison's courtroom outburst, about Judge Monroe's refusal to be influenced by political pressure. And in the days that followed, the story spread across the state and beyond, a reminder that in at least one courtroom, the law still meant something. Justice was still possible, and privilege was no protection against accountability. If this story reminded you that justice must be blind to wealth and power, that every life has equal value before the law, and that the arrogance of privilege must be met with the consequences it deserves, then hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories of justice prevailing. Tell us where you're watching from, because stories like this need to be heard everywhere, shared everywhere, until everyone understands that in a truly just society, your last name doesn't matter. Only your choices, your actions, and your accountability for the consequences those actions create.